Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, or as it's simply known as TNA, began in June of 2002 after being founded by Jeff and Jerry Jarrett. The company got its start by airing weekly pay-per-views and was quickly purchased by Panda Energy International. Throughout the years, TNA would rise in popularity, particularly in the late 2000s, thanks to several big-name signings, none bigger than Kurt Angle. To coincide with the big-name signings, TNA featured several homegrown stars that generated buzz for the product. Names like Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, and Bobby Roode helped put the company on the map. The company incorporated a unique style of presentation for a pro wrestling company with its patented six-sided ring. TNA regularly featured better quality matches with more excitement than those put on by WWE at the time. The company's X division was at the forefront of this exciting brand of in-ring action. At one point, the company had licensing deals to produce toys and even a video game, while at one point they broadcasted their show live on Monday nights, even if it was for a brief period, to go head-to-head with Monday Night Raw. Several bad business decisions, a hot potato-like change in ownership, and frankly, poor booking led to the decline of TNA during the 2010s, a decline that many point to being at the hands of Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, while others, rightfully so, can point the blame at Vince Russo and Dixie Carter. Whatever the case may be, TNA has overcome several changes in ownership and rebrands to find their way back on the wrestling map, granted in a much smaller way. With the return of the TNA brand in 2024 and a partnership with WWE's parent company Endeavor, TNA has found its way back on track in some regard. Although it is likely the company will never reclaim the heights it once enjoyed during its glory days. Nevertheless, I present to you the rise and fall of TNA Wrestling. TNA was founded in the summer of 2002 when Jeff Jarrett, his father Jerry Jarrett, and Bob Ryder went on a fishing trip. During this trip, they talked business and TNA Wrestling was born. The company started out as a weekly pay-per-view brand because of how wrestling was viewed by broadcast companies at the time. Keep in mind, Turner Broadcasting had just killed WCW, their biggest rating draw at the time, simply because it was wrestling. With pessimism implored on a TV deal, Jeff Jarrett aired shows on pay-per-view for $9.99 every Wednesday night. This lasted until 2004. Where did the name TNA come from, you may ask? Well, that was a product from the brain of Vince Russo, who had been brought in by Jarrett to be the company's lead writer. Russo thought it was a funny play on tits and ass, bro. Yeah, hilarious. Originally, the company was a branch of the now insanely obscure NWA. So the company was originally known as NWA Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. So originally, TNA was owned by the Jarretts and Bob Ryder and was financially backed by a company named Health South. Long story short on Health South, they were a crooked healthcare company that was committing fraud to bolster their stock price. They were reporting insane profits in the late 90s, early 2000s of well over $300 million per year, which just weren't there. In reality, they were losing money, and after their CFO resigned because he didn't want to be a part of this scheme, the company started making changes. One of those changes was the small southern-based company they were financially backing. They called Jeff Jarrett like 3 months into TNA's existence and tell him, hey, we're pulling out of the deal and we can't pay you for last week's show either. Enter Dixie Carter and her father's company, Panda Energy. Jeff Jarrett is scrambling and meeting with everyone he can in regards to the company's financial trouble. Trifecta Entertainment, which was owned by Dixie Carter, had TNA as a client and handled their marketing. Jeff meets with Dixie and explains what happened with Health South, and Dixie tells him that she'll talk with her father about investing in the company. Jeff and his father travel out to Dallas to secure a meeting with Bob Carter, Dixie's father and owner of Panda Energy. And in Jarrett's words, the Tennessee Titans saved TNA. TNA had ran an angle on one of their shows where members of the NFL's Tennessee Titans had jumped Jarrett. This angle made the front page of newspapers and was featured on SportsCenter and so on. The crossover appeal and the opportunity to be close to something within proximity of football enamored Bob Carter and led him to buying a controlling stake of TNA. After the purchase, he appointed his daughter to run the company along with Jeff. They rebranded the company, broke off from the NWA and became known as TNA Entertainment LLC. This move led to the launch of TNA Explosion, a weekly show that had great appeal in the international market. It was more of a recap show, which still exists till this very day. What also came to fruition from this move was the launch of TNA's flagship weekly television program, Impact. In May of 2004, Dixie Carter is able to land a television deal with Fox Sports Net to broadcast TNA Impact on its channel. With this show, TNA stood out even more from the style of WWE. During this time, we saw the introduction of the six-sided ring and more realistic coverage of the shows, similar to a sporting event. However, in May 2005, their TV deal with Fox Sports expired, leaving TNA with no home for their weekly show. Impact was canceled because it wasn't drawing much interest. The average ratings were about a 0.2. The network had potential to be a good fit for TNA, but due to lack of promotion from Fox itself, Impact on Fox left a lot to be desired. Eventually, WWE would leave their broadcast home of Spike TV a few months later for a return to USA Network. TNA would soon secure a deal with the network. Beginning on October 1st, 2005, Impact would air on Spike TV as part of a rebrand for the channel. The goal was to appeal to a male demographic. The UFC was also brought on around this time. Not going to lie, it was pretty cool to see TNA and UFC being marketed side by side. This obviously led to some cross-promotion between the brands. Tito Ortiz and Rampage Jackson found their way to Impact Wrestling at different points throughout the years. WWE went back to USA to appeal to a wider audience, something TNA could have benefited from after establishing themselves on Spike for a while, if only they had been managed better. It was during the Spike TV era when we bear witness to the peak of TNA wrestling. Christian Cage made his debut shortly after the company started on Spike. He was the first of many big-time acquisitions of former WWE talent for TNA. The company featured a nucleus consisting of Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Sting, Christopher Daniels, Jeff Jarrett, and Christian. Another strength of theirs was their women's division. Ladies like Awesome Kong, Gail Kim, and the Beautiful People helped make up a far better women's division than what was being presented on WWE's TV. While WWE was featuring Candice Michelle versus Tori Wilson in a bra and panties match, TNA featured Awesome Kong versus ODB in a great in-ring match. Honestly, Awesome Kong was ahead of her time, and she'd be a massive star in WWE if she was in her prime right now. Arguably, the best match from this era is AJ Styles versus Samoa Joe versus Christopher Daniels at Unbreakable 2005. If you haven't seen this match, I implore you to watch it immediately. It is that damn good. This match was the only 5-star match awarded to TNA from Dave Meltzer in the company's history for almost 20 years, until Will Ospreay and Josh Alexander received a 5.5-star match in January 2024. I cannot and I won't talk about the peak of TNA without talking about one man, and that man is Kurt Angle. The Olympic gold medalist became fed up with WWE after being moved to the ECW brand in 2006, so much so that he left the company altogether. At the time, there were rumors swirling that Kurt might make his presence felt in the UFC. That fell through, and Kurt Angle did the unthinkable at the time by joining TNA. Yeah, Christian Cage had joined TNA a year prior to Angle, but let's be honest, and no disrespect at all to Christian, he is great in his own right. However, he just was no Kurt Angle. Angle was a huge star in 2006, one of the 3 or 4 biggest stars in WWE. For me, being 10 years old at the time, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw Kurt Angle make his debut in the Impact Zone to confront Samoa Joe. That was it. TNA was legitimized in the eyes of many wrestling fans, casual and hardcore alike, when Angle showed up. Angle had and still has that kind of appeal with wrestling fans. He's a good enough wrestler to appeal to hardcore fans who obsess over in-ring work, while also being funny and charismatic enough to appeal to everyday, casual wrestling fans. I went back and watched Kurt Angle's TNA debut from October 2006 while producing this video, and man, that moment sent so much nostalgia running through my body. That was an epic moment. Kurt comes out with new theme music. No you suck chants, no pomp and circumstance, just a badass man off of like 30 perks. This was prime Perk Angle. He was jacked and as intense as ever. What a maniac. This storyline between Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe, in my opinion, was hands down the best thing TNA ever produced. Their feud was the absolute apex of this company to me. Genesis 2006 was the in-ring debut of Kurt Angle, which became the company's most successful pay-per-view to date, having drawn 60,000 buys. The undercard of the show was awesome too, featuring Abyss vs Sting and AJ Styles vs Christian Cage. Some people on the internet have debated if having Angle defeat Joe and end his unbeaten streak was the right move. It really is a tough one to call because on one hand you have Joe, who is the future of pro wrestling, and Angle, who is the hottest free agent TNA has ever signed and the biggest star they ever had in that star's prime. It would have been a bad look for Angle to lose, and I could see people complaining and saying how dumb TNA is for having Kurt Angle lose his first pay-per-view match. So like I said, tough call. TNA kept rolling throughout 2007, 2008, and 2009 by heavily featuring Christian until he left the company to go back to WWE, Angle, AJ Styles, and Samoa Joe. TNA kept up with good signings of former WWE stars by bringing in Booker T, who still had a lot left to give at the time, the Dudleys, Scott Steiner, Rhino, and Mick Foley. During this time, they landed licensing deals to manufacture toys through Jakks Pacific, trading cards and memorabilia with TriStar Productions, and their very own video game. Then, in the fall of 2009, just as TNA was flourishing with a roster full of young talents, some that I haven't mentioned like Beer Money, Nigel McGuinness, Matt Morgan, and Suicide, to go along with other homegrown talents and stars in their prime, Dixie Carter made a phone call, with hopes that this phone call would catapult TNA to the next level. Dixie's next goal was to compete with WWE to draw bigger buy rates and ratings, and tour around the world full time. And this phone call was made to the one man in wrestling who loves to work with young talents and stars in their prime. It was none other than Terry Gene Bollea. At first, the Hogan and Bischoff era looked like it was going to be a success. Bischoff was brought in to help out in creative at the demand of Hulk Hogan, who Bischoff stated wouldn't work for TNA if he wasn't hired too. On the January 4th, 2010 episode of Impact, Hogan made his debut, and so did Jeff Hardy. Two huge stars, and we were kicking into high gear. However, Bischoff made some changes that took away the uniqueness of TNA by getting rid of the six-sided ring at Genesis just weeks later. During this time, TNA slowly began to feel like a lesser version of WWE. It looked like WWE from a production standpoint and felt like WWE from a talent and storyline standpoint at this time. Now, there was some good to this version of TNA. The rise of Austin Aries comes to mind, and there were some fun segments involving Ric Flair and Jay Lethal. That's just to name a few. Hulk Hogan vs Sting was a massive draw for TNA, drawing 20 million viewers on YouTube. TNA, they did good TV ratings while Hogan was around in 2010, his first year with the company. They averaged 1.06, which was down from the 2009 average of 1.14, but was the same as the 2008 average. The way Vince Russo put it while speaking on his podcast, The Brand, he said that when Dixie Carter met Hulk Hogan, she was starstruck. She could barely talk and her hands were shaking. Well, Dixie was starstruck and Hulk was money struck, pal. Hogan took advantage of her from a business sense and pretty much got whatever he wanted. He said that he and Eric Bischoff were a package deal. So Dixie, if you want me, bro, you gotta bring in Eric too, as Russo says it. Dixie really couldn't afford to pay Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff whatever they wanted, according to Russo. So they had to take money from other departments and even talents. When it was time to negotiate his new contract, AJ Styles was asked to take a 60% pay cut, so he left the company. Granted, this was after a few years of financial hard times in 2013. but still, Styles was the franchise at TNA. To disrespect him with an offer like that while you're paying Hulk Hogan God knows what to wrestle Sting at nearly 60 years old is insane. Like WCW, bad creative wasn't to blame for the downfall of TNA entirely. Mismanagement of money and poor decisions was to blame for TNA. As I laid out, Hogan was making more money than what TNA could afford, so the company started going into the red. Combine that with the changes to the production and reliance on aging former WWE stars, you pretty much have what's going on in AEW right now. TNA had so much potential, but things started going really bad for them. One of those moments, which I've highlighted on my channel already, was the Victory Road 2011 incident where Jeff Hardy paraded his way down to the ring for the main event versus Sting, higher than the sky off of whatever combination of drugs and alcohol he was on. That was an embarrassment to the company and the paying customers who bought that show. In theory, the acquisition of Hogan was supposed to help TNA land marketing deals and better advertisement revenue for the company, like he did in WCW. However, Hogan saw a money mark like Dixie Carter and took her to the bank for all she's worth while not really elevating TNA in the process. During March 2010, TNA would go head-to-head with Monday Night Raw in a short-lived stint. The recreation of the Monday Night Wars was a desperate attempt for Bischoff and Hogan to recapture the lightning in the bottle they once had with Nitro 15 years prior. Needless to say, it didn't work, as more people watched the Thursday night replays of Monday's show, so they moved back to Thursday nights about 2 months later. Hogan and Bischoff's presence frustrated homegrown talents like Styles, Samoa Joe, and Bobby Roode. Eventually, things got so bad that Dixie's parents divested their stake in the company after Dixie bought them out. This was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back, as Hogan's contract was not renewed in 2013. Daniels, Sting, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe all left around the same time. Austin Aries, he was gone too by 2015. All those guys mentioned went on to find success in WWE and or AEW, most notably AJ Styles, who upon his debut with WWE in 2016 has been one of the faces of the company ever since. In my mind, the death blow to TNA as we knew it was when they lost their Spike TV deal in 2014. The story of how TNA lost the Spike TV deal is up for debate. However, it is largely put on Vince Russo. Allegedly, and according to several who were there at the time, notably Eric Bischoff, Spike TV wanted Vince Russo nowhere near the TNA product. Dixie hired Russo in secret to be a consultant, and one day he accidentally emailed Mike Johnson of PWI instead of Mike Tenay with directions for the TNA commentators. This led to Russo working with TNA again after being fired, becoming public knowledge. While others believed Spike TV was going into a different direction and no longer wanted pro wrestling on their network. Angelina Love said that Spike was going to re-sign TNA, but then Dixie Carter asked for double what they were making before, and Spike essentially backed out of the deal. All of these factors could be true. Nevertheless, TNA losing Spike TV was just a nail in the coffin. Eventually, Impact was picked up by Destination America. Then in early 2015, Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins became a financial backer of the company. This actually brought some hype to TNA, the last time they've had hype or hopes of reaching their former glory days since. However, an ugly mess ensued as Corgan sued TNA for not paying the debts he loaned to Carter. Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling were gaining steam come 2016, leaving Impact Wrestling in the dust. 2016 though was low-key a good year for TNA in hindsight, but no one was watching them because they were on a network nobody ever heard of. We saw the introduction of Broken Matt Hardy, arguably Matt Hardy's best work of his career. Also, we saw the rise of Drew Galloway or Drew McIntyre, Bobby Lashley's resurgence, and Mike Bennett and Maria Kanellis becoming stars. There was more, and 2016 TNA, like I said, was actually pretty good. In 2017, Anthem Sports and Entertainment purchased TNA and rebranded the company to Impact Wrestling. They attempted to merge with Jeff Jarrett's Global Force Wrestling, but that ended in a messy lawsuit after Jarrett accused Anthem of copyright infringement. During the pandemic, they had a brief partnership with AEW, which saw Kenny Omega and Christian Cage take turns winning the Impact Championship. 2024 kicked off with a bang as the company brought back the TNA moniker, complete with the six-sided ring. Notably, Nick Nemeth, formerly Dolph Ziggler, joined the promotion around this time. Also, they formed a working relationship with WWE, which seems to be in full effect as several TNA stars have appeared on WWE television, including Jordynne Grace at the 2024 Royal Rumble and Joe Hendry on NXT. TNA had a promising rise all the way until 2009. Looking back at it, it's clear the gamble of bringing in Hogan and Bischoff did not work. How could they have gotten Eric Bischoff, Hulk Hogan, and Vince Russo on the same page anyway? Perhaps if they had stuck to their budget and continued to grow organically with their own unique brand instead of trying to recreate the Monday Night Wars, TNA would have thrived and could even be thriving right now. However, I must commend the company for sticking around through so many rebrands, changes of ownership, and new TV channels. It feels like TNA will be around forever at this point, even if it is a small-time promotion, basically serving as a developmental ground for WWE. The company doesn't employ any of its founders, as Jeff Jarrett left the company over a decade ago, and Dixie Carter is nowhere to be found. That was the rise and fall of TNA wrestling. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll talk to you on the next one.